My brothers and sisters, they placed before me a speech crafted by Indian diplomats, demanding that I apologize to Prime Minister Modi for even considering Pakistan's Islamic Defense Alliance. They expected me to stand before the world and beg forgiveness for exploring partnerships that advance African interests rather than Indian profits. That document was humiliation disguised as diplomacy. Page after page of forced apologies for supposedly betraying the India-Africa strategic partnership. Paragraph after paragraph renouncing what they called dangerous Islamic military alignments. Section after section pledging eternal gratitude to India while surrendering any possibility of cooperation with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, or what they arrogantly described as terrorist-linked defense blocs. When I finished reading their script, I knew exactly what it was: Modi treating Africa as his personal property. They wanted me to choose between $71 billion in Indian deals and Islamic solidarity, between economic survival and defensive dignity, between staying rich and staying sovereign. But I did not fly to New Delhi to choose between my dignity and my deals. I came to declare why Africa bows to no one. It had begun 3 weeks earlier, when news broke that Burkina Faso was considering joining the Pakistan-Saudi Defense Alliance. Within hours, my phone rang, not through the usual diplomatic channels, but through Modi's personal line, bypassing all protocol. President Traoré. His voice was ice cold. I hope you understand the implications of what you are considering. India has invested billions in African development. Those investments were made with certain expectations about partnership loyalty. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Choose India, or lose everything we had built together. $14 billion in grain deals. $15 billion in oil partnerships. $42 billion projected from rare earth mining over the next 5 years. Nuclear technology transfers that could revolutionize African energy independence. All of it suddenly hanging in the balance, simply because I dared to explore cooperation with Muslim nations India happened to view as rivals. My brothers and sisters, this is how neocolonialism works in the 21st century. Not through direct occupation, but through economic dependency that creates political obligations. Not through military conquest, but through development deals tied with invisible chains. For 3 days, Indian pressure intensified. Emergency meetings with their ambassadors across Africa. Phone calls from Indian business leaders threatening to reconsider investments. Leaked stories in Indian media painting Africans as ungrateful and linking Pakistan to terrorism. Then came the nuclear ultimatum. India's Atomic Energy Commission announced technical reviews of all African nuclear cooperation agreements. The message was clear: apologize, or lose access to clean energy technology that could power continental progress for generations. But they misunderstood something fundamental about African leadership today. We are not the generation forced to choose friends because others demand it. We are the generation that builds bridges between all partners while bowing to none. The breaking point came when Indian intelligence operatives were caught monitoring communications between African Union headquarters and Pakistani diplomatic missions. They were not investigating terrorism. They were spying on legitimate diplomatic conversations about defensive cooperation. That night, I called Pakistan's defense minister. "Brother," I said, "India treats Africa like their private property. They think our military partnerships require their permission. What do you think of that?" His response was immediate. "President Traoré, Pakistan recognizes African sovereignty. India apparently does not. That alone tells you who truly respects your independence." Within 48 hours, I was on a plane to New Delhi, not with their apology script, but with my own answer to economic blackmail dressed up as diplomacy. The Indian establishment deployed every pressure tactic. Business leaders canceling meetings. Coincidentally, Media campaigns accusing African leaders of choosing terrorism over development. Strategic leaks about reconsidering infrastructure projects. But they miscalculated. They assumed African leaders still operated from weakness, still believed we must accept conditions imposed by others, still thought we had no alternatives. When I walked into that conference hall in New Delhi, surrounded by officials expecting contrition, I carried something they never anticipated: the confidence of a continent that no longer begs. I did not waste time with pleasantries. Prime Minister Modi, you invited me here to apologize for exploring military cooperation with Pakistan. Before I respond to that request, let me ask you something. When did India begin believing it owned African foreign policy? The silence was deafening. Officials shifted uneasily. Modi's face hardened. You threaten to cancel grain deals if we speak to Pakistan. You review nuclear agreements if we consider Saudi partnerships. You monitor our diplomatic conversations like we are vassals, not partners. Tell me, Prime Minister, is this how equals treat one another? I continued, without pause. India speaks of strategic partnership while demanding strategic submission. You offer development assistance while expecting diplomatic obedience. You provide technology transfers while requiring political loyalty. That is not partnership, that is dependency, dressed in better marketing. The room crackled with tension. Reporters froze their pens. Diplomats stared at their phones, buzzing with urgent messages. Prime Minister, I pressed on. Africa appreciates India's contributions to our development. But appreciation is not ownership. Gratitude is not obedience. Partnership is not control. Finally, Modi replied. President Traoré, India's concerns are legitimate. Pakistan represents regional instability. Islamic military alliances create dangerous precedents. Prime Minister, I said firmly, with respect, Africa will decide what represents danger to African interests. Pakistan offers defense cooperation without demanding we abandon other friends. Saudi Arabia provides military technology without spying on our communications. They treat us as equals because they understand sovereignty. Then I addressed the core of their fear. You are not truly concerned with African security, Prime Minister. You are concerned with African independence, because an independent Africa chooses based on African interests, not Indian preferences. I took out my phone, right there at the table. Allow me to share something. It was a message from a farmer in Burkina Faso whose family depended on our grain deal with India. He wrote, Mr. President, we value the seeds from India that help feed our families. But we also value the security that comes from having friends who do not demand we choose between them. Do not let anyone make us smaller, just to make them comfortable. I looked directly at Modi. That farmer understands something your government has not yet grasped. True partnership strengthens both parties, not one at the expense of the other. What followed was unprecedented. I dismantled every single threat. Nuclear cooperation? Africa is already developing alternative energy partnerships. Grain agreements? African agriculture is diversifying and becoming self-sufficient. Rare earth deals? China, Russia, and the Gulf stand ready to fill any gap. The realization spread through the room. India's leverage was weaker than assumed. Modi's advisors whispered urgently. Prime Minister, I reminded him, India became great by refusing to choose between America and Russia during the Cold War. You called it non-alignment. Africa practices the same principle today. We will not choose between India and Pakistan, between Hindu partnerships and Islamic partnerships, between Asian allies based on religion. Our choices are ours alone. By then, even the security guards were listening. India's greatness, I concluded, was built on independence, not dependence. Africa's future rests on the same principle. We will work with India on projects of mutual benefit. We will work with Pakistan on defense when it serves our security. We will work with Saudi Arabia on energy when it powers our development. The choice is yours. Treat us as equals and maintain friendship, or treat us as subjects and lose Africa's respect. I stood to leave. The aftermath was immediate. Indian media called it unprecedented African defiance. Business circles warned about losing Africa to Islamic influence. Political commentators questioned whether Modi had miscalculated. But the true earthquake was in Africa. Within 24 hours, the African Union called an emergency session, not to discuss India's threats, but to discuss sovereignty. 38 presidents joined virtually. The consensus was historic. No African nation would accept development deals tied to restrictions on foreign policy. Any country using economic blackmail would be deemed unreliable. And then, everything shifted. China stepped forward with new grain deals. Russia offered nuclear cooperation with no strings attached. Gulf nations expanded rare earth partnerships with better terms. African states coordinated so that if one faced threats, others provided support. India panicked. Business leaders backtracked, worried about losing market access. Diplomats realized their threats had forged African unity instead of African submission. 2 weeks later, Modi's office requested a clarification meeting about misunderstandings. Translation: they wanted to retreat without admitting defeat. But it was already too late. Africa had rediscovered its leverage. The grain deals continued, this time under new terms protecting African independence. Nuclear cooperation resumed, with clauses barring political interference. Rare earth agreements renewed, with fairer profit-sharing formulas. Most importantly, the precedent was set. Economic partnership must serve mutual benefit, not political control. Assistance comes without strings. Technology transfers occur between equals, not masters and subjects. Today, 3 months later, Africa's relationship with India is stronger, not weaker. Because it is grounded in respect, not dependency. We maintain our grain partnerships with India while advancing defense cooperation with Pakistan. We continue nuclear collaboration while developing Saudi defense ties. We preserve rare earth deals while exploring Islamic alliances. India has learned, threatening Africa produces alternatives, not compliance. Economic blackmail creates resistance, not obedience. True partnership requires respect for sovereignty on both sides. My brothers and sisters, this is what sovereignty looks like in practice. Not isolation, but freedom of choice. Not obedience, but dignity. Not submission, but equality. When Modi demanded an apology for exploring Muslim defense cooperation, I gave him something far greater, a lesson in how equals speak to each other. The speech they wrote for me now hangs framed in my office, not as a reminder of what they wanted me to say, but as proof of how some still think they can dictate African choices through economic pressure. That apology will never be delivered, because Africa has nothing to apologize for. We never did. We are not Indian property. We are not bound to limit our partnerships to preserve others' comfort. We are sovereign nations, making sovereign choices, building partnerships that serve African interests above all else. The world is learning. Economic threats no longer dictate African policy. Development aid no longer buys diplomatic silence. Technology transfers no longer purchase obedience. Because when dignity is not negotiable, partnership becomes possible. When sovereignty is not for sale, cooperation becomes real. When respect must be earned, relationships finally become sustainable. India tried to force us to choose between their friendship and our freedom. Instead, we chose both, by refusing to accept that we had to choose at all.